Where they can do
That's not how.
That's not how.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Hi there. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening and for attending Left Bank Books Presents Anne-Marie Oomen and John Griswold. So for all of you here in person, thank you for being here. And we also thank you for wearing your mask for the duration of the event. For those of you joining us at home, we appreciate you being here and all your little pixels as well. My name is Evan, and I'm a bookseller as well as the event host here at Left Bank Books. So first of all, I just want to mention that tonight's event is only possible because of your support. When you support Left Bank Books, your money goes directly into your local economy. It helps keep our bookstore open, but it also helps keep your streets paved, your libraries funded, your parks free, and so many other things that make St. Louis a wonderful place. So thank you all for shopping local and for supporting this event. So we are always hard at work planning entertaining, unique, educational, and wonderful event programming for you all. So we encourage you all to check out our full event calendar on our website, which is left-bank.com, for more information and for a full list of all of our programming for readers of all ages. So for tonight's event, we're going to be welcoming two wonderful writers here this evening. So first of all, we have John Griswold. John Griswold is a staff writer at the Common Reader, a journal of the essay, at Washington University in St. Louis. His first collection of essays, Pirates You Don't Know and Other Adventures in the Examined Life, made best of lists at Chicago Tribune, Entropy, and Essay Daily. John is also the author of the novel A Democracy of Ghosts, a Forward Magazine Book of the Year, and the narrative nonfiction, Herrin, The Beautiful History of an Infamous American City. He also wrote columns for many years at Inside Higher Ed and McSweeney's Internet Tendency. His essays and stories have appeared in journals such as Ninth Letter, Brevity, and Natural Bridge, and in the anthologies Best Creative Nonfiction, American Sports Writing, and Best American Sports Writing with notable essays listed in Best American Non-Required Reading and Best American Essays. He has worked as a book editor, journal editor, university professor, copywriter, snake handler, and U.S. Army deep sea diver and combat engineer. He was born in Saigon, Vietnam, and lives in the St. Louis area. Also joining us tonight is the wonderful Anne-Marie Oomen. Anne-Marie is the author of The Lake Michigan Mermaid, Pulling Down the Barn, House of Fields, An American Map, Essays, Uncoded Woman and Love, Sex, and 4-H. She has written 7 plays, including an award-winning The Secrets of Luchatalk Tavern. She is a poetry and nonfiction instructor at Solstice MFA at LaSalle University and Interlochen College of Creative Arts. She and her husband live in their handmade house near Traverse City, Michigan. Her new book is As Long as I Know You. As Long as I Know You is a compelling read for any adult grappling with a living elder. It narrates Anne-Marie Oomen's journey to finally knowing her mother, as well as the heartbreaking loss of her mother's immense capabilities. It explores how humor and compassion grow belatedly between a mother and daughter who don't much like each other. So please join me in welcoming Anne-Marie Oomen and John Griswold this evening. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anne-Marie, and I really appreciate everybody coming out and to Left Bank and the entire staff for hosting us. The night is short and literature is long, so I'll go ahead and get to my part of it here. My book is about the problems of complexity as I see it, and how or if we can know things in our lives. In the book, it takes several forms, including parenthood, personal politics, and meeting ordinary people who do bad things, as well as people who are like what Kurt Vonnegut described when he said, "You meet saints everywhere. They can be anywhere. They are people behaving decently in an indecent society." My book is also kind of a travel book, or at least it has essays in it about going to Vietnam, to Russia, Japan, and Panama, as well as domestically in Louisiana, New Mexico, the Angola prison rodeo in Louisiana, and a particularly bloody rattlesnake roundup in Sweetwater, Texas. One of the places I went in the 8 years that this book covers was the Standing Rock conflict south of Bismarck, North Dakota, where the Lakota and Dakota peoples were trying to stop a pipeline that in its construction had destroyed some of their sacred sites and could have ruined their source of drinking water in the Missouri River. And in December of 2016, the son of the former Native Supreme Commander Wes Clark, who was named Wes Clark as well, put out a call for veterans to come out to Standing Rock to stand up for the Lakota and their allies, and they called this Veterans Stand for Standing Rock. So I went out there to cover it, and this first short bit that I'll read has to do with coming back to Chicago after Standing Rock. The most beautiful AK-47 I ever saw didn't come out until the end of my first trip to Standing Rock. Our little group had been awake most of the week, glimpsed the armies of the corporate state, got caught in a blizzard on the Great Plains, and were broke from driving back and forth across the country. Now we were safe and warm in a pricey neighborhood in Chicago, and would soon be easing back into our normal lives. I was exhausted, sick with the need for sleep, but seeing the weapon emerge, I blinked in the gas firelight and eased up on an elbow from the floor. I served in the regular Army 4 years and qualified on the personal weapons at my time, but that was more than 30 years ago. Suddenly, I felt like my old Army roommate, Sammy, a homesick kid off Puerto Rico for the first time, who used to groan at every unfair surprise that life presented. Oh, what is this shit now? When I was a young troop, the AK-47 stood for a brethren of hatred we'd sworn to defend against. Army cadre told us the world was made up of M16 countries and AK-47 countries, and they kept us in the dark on training ranges to listen to bolts slide home in each rifle so we could learn to tell friend from foe by the sound of things alone. The M16 was familiar to me with its little lunchbox handle. The AK was foreign. These days, patriotic Americans love AKs for their firepower, reliability, low cost, and their cachet in killing so many Americans and others over the past 70 years. The machine building plant in Russia that makes them as the biggest arms manufacturer there, and it sells as many AKs to American civilians as to Russian cops and soldiers combined. The rifles are typically factory pressed metal with drab stocks and grips, as identical and utilitarian as wasps. This one was different. Other than its barrel, action, and sights, it was made of wood as lustrous as honey. It looked like some handcrafted toy at a truck stop under the candy cigarettes and divinity that no one would buy because it was too big and heavy and didn't look real. It was like seeing your own coffin made of perverse tropical hardwoods and lovingly polished with coconut oil. It was a 4 a.m. vision, a miracle. It glowed like a body on a beach. You son of a bitch, I felt like shouting at the rifle. Jump ahead a bit. This book might be thought of as a collection of travel essays in the spirit of the Haibun, a classical form invented by Basho, a Japanese poet and writer from the 1600s, whose work has been important to me. Typically, Haibun combined prose and haiku poetry. Mercifully, you'll find only one haiku by me here in the book, written as I walked a portion of the Basho Trail in Japan, thanks to the generosity of the Newman Travel Center at WashU. What I find useful as a prose writer in the Haibun are the form's strange, almost hallucinatory images. It's mostly unshakable calm and humor, its layering of landscapes and time, and its tendency to make concrete sensory details lean toward metaphor. Its methods, traveling, seeing, seeking empathy and self-knowledge, became my own way of trying at the start of the new millennium. Trying to do what? That's the question. Maybe the most important thing for me. The AK's owner stood over me as if still on patrol in Kunar, his face a pitted mask of exhaustion and PTSD. He loaded the weapon, its muzzle pointed vaguely at my feet. With a brisk metallic snap, he racked the charging handle, chambering around, then threw the rifle to his shoulder and aimed through the window at a townhouse across the street. After a time sighting the thing in his mind, he lowered the weapon, ejected the cartridges into a pile on the floor, slid out the magazine, and checked the port in that odd motion that has no other human purpose. I was awake now. So one of the things I did in the book to approach this notion of complexity for myself and to gain some solace in my life was to go to Japan. And here's a quick bit from that. This is from July of 2019. In 1689, poet Matsuo Basho walked nearly 1,500 miles through mountainous northern Japan, which was then considered a wild, unholy frontier. From this trip came his most famous book, which is translated as Narrow Road to the Interior, or Narrow Road to the Deep, or Far North. Donald Keene, the Dean of Japanese Literature Scholars, says, "More people know this work than any other in Japanese literature. I don't think you can find a Japanese who's not at least had some exposure to it because of its peculiar attraction, the beauty of the poetry, the sensitivity to the different landscapes that he traveled across, and the atmosphere engendered by Basho, the man himself." But Japan's culture of walking pilgrimages predates Basho and still exists, and so that's how I went to walk a segment of the Basho Trail. One of my oldest friends, who'd been a sergeant major when I was an Army deep sea diver, his name is Frenchie, and he called and used his irritated voice with me. "Well, did you get that grant?" He wanted to go somewhere, almost anywhere, because he had money and felt time was short. So his tone wasn't all acting these days, and to his surprise, I said, "Yes, I got the grant, let's go." My self-guided walk would make a quadrilateral on the north end of the main island of Japan. And afterwards, I wanted to visit Tokyo and Kyoto, the former seats of imperial power and cities where Basho lived, as well as Hiroshima. I was also interested in recent technologies, bullet trains, a Toyota plant, nuclear energy, and warfare that layered the landscape that Basho might often otherwise still recognize. I couldn't think of another place as modern as Japan that was so rooted in unique history and so different from anything I had known. Frenchie wanted to go along. Neither of us wanted him to walk the trail with me. He'd had some health problems, and I was looking for deep quiet. So we would meet in Tokyo, and later we would move on through Japan together, splitting costs to extend our funds. This other little bit from the Japan trip. This is called Travel's Mixed Bag. Was it transcendent? My nephew asked at the barbecue in Illinois. He's generous and kind, so he was hoping I would say yes, most of all for my own sake. The Japan trip was transcendent, transformative, all the modifiers we too often use and don't really mean. It was the sort of high-level experience I want my children to know I had, so that years from now they won't wonder if I was happy enough in my private life, apart from the depth of our relationships. My friend Larry says it was even more meaningful for them to know they're the sons of a father who went and did this thing. That doesn't mean the travel was always easy or even pleasurable, which is in fact a large part of the point, especially for anyone hoping to catch something true in the writing of it. Writer Paul Thoreau says, "A travel book has the capacity to express a country's heart, and perhaps the heart of a traveler too, but only as long as it stays away from vacations, holidays, sightseeing, and the half-truths in official handouts. As long as it concentrates on people and their landscape, and it includes the discomforts as well as the pleasures, the dissonance as well as the melodies, the contradictions and the vivid trivia, the fungi on the wet boats." That's why he's out. My photos looked enviable on Instagram, and I ended up feeling guilty about that. I posted them for my family, not to make someone feel bad they had no tofu pudding, as I did. Chances are good they didn't want tofu pudding or anything it took to get to the pudding pot. Because the photos also failed to capture the fatigue of flying, taking trains, buses, and cabs, hiking, humping bags, sleeping in strange beds every night. The feeling of walking around in dirty clothes, sometimes sleeping in them too. Rain that drives you into a plastic rain suit under your load, but the heat and humidity are a misery. You're soaked anyway with sweat, so you strip it all off to be cold in the rain. The bad knee and hip and ankle in bear country, a kind of treachery of the body. The boredom of passage across a landscape that has begun to be familiar, with only yourself for company and time doing what it wants. The chafing, so even a light day pack rubs you raw. Dragging heavy suitcases, your own and then your traveling partners, up from the subway, through a department store in the afternoon rush, only to be told the passage you're looking for is in the subway after all. And making this comedy of errors 5 times in a row, but it's not funny, and there's little left. Waiting 2.5 hours in the humanity of a waiting room, then discovering you're not at the station where you needed to be. Just as you've sagged in relief at getting to your destination, learning there's one more local to catch. Exhausted, sun-baked, dehydrated, hungry, sore back, plantar fasciitis, sleeplessness and weird dreams, jet lag twice, the feeling of waking and not knowing which continent you're on, or if the slamming door and shout that woke you is your child in need. The question is not whether I loved it. Of course I did. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, and I burned that thing down to the nub. The question is whether I would do it all over again immediately, as some asked me, and that answer has to be no for now. Something begins to happen when I travel, just short of 3 weeks into a trip. And I used to think that I began to wear out at that point because the travel itself was strenuous. I remember feeling the urge in Vietnam to be home again, sitting on my own couch, drinking Diet Coke from my own glass. It sounds pathetic, but it's important. Now I think that's the point at which a place begins to become real, and I no longer operate on anticipation and excitement. The expectations born of films, books, and word of mouth begin to pale next to the reality, which is often both bigger and much smaller than the distant conjecture. It's the point where I understand just how much I don't belong to this place, and that it's time either to settle in or leave. I was not surprised to find, after hiking the Basho Trail and traveling Japan for a month, that I felt the true aesthetic choice was to go home. And real quick, the last bit is about seeing Mount Fuji. On our last day, full day in Japan, Frenchie and I tried to see Fuji by taking the train down from Tokyo. I was amused to read that Basho missed it on one of his trips too, as we did, and for the same reasons. This is a haiku of his, translated by the American poet Sam Hamill. Heavy falling mist, Mount Fuji not visible, but still intriguing, he wrote. We spent the entire day in a little town with nothing to see and nowhere to go. Most of those hours packed into a rail station with everyone else trying to stay dry. Every time we walked out, we got caught in rain. You never know how a journey will go. All you can do is try. As we sped away on the express, acceptingly, the Japanese woman scurried up the car to us and pointed out the window. Fuji-san loomed, just visible behind the fog. She went to her seat, made origami models of the phenomenon for each of us, little paper mountains that slid behind white paper veils and out again, and brought them to us. I bowed in gratitude and humility. And here I brought a little show and tell, is the little origami Fuji. That's the way it was for a long time, and then it peaks out. There you go. Thank you.
Hello? Is this good? All right, thank you. Wow, anyone who can
mix AK-47 and Basho's Trail as my admiration, hands down. Thank you, John. It's really amazing. And I can't wait to dive in full force. Am I speaking loudly enough? Can you
Yes.
follow? And clear. All right. And I also want to thank Left Bank Books, Evan, Shane, the people who have been organizing, but most of all, many of my husband, my family are here tonight, and I just want to say thank you so much for coming in and how grateful I am. And I want to start with, I'm going to read two short pieces, and I'm going to start with the prologue of As Long as I Know You, which many of you have already heard is based on what my mother said to me when I asked her what made her life worth living. I had been reading Atul Gawande's Being Mortal book, and in that book he asks his father what makes his life worth living, and his father says, if I can watch a football game and sit in the recliner and eat chocolate ice cream, my life is worth living. And when I finally found the courage, because my mother and I were not close, to ask her that, and she did not like speaking of death, she said the words, as long as I know you, which changed everything for me. And that's where the title comes from. But the book starts and launches with a realization. And I'm going to start with trigger warning here, the death of my father. So this is a death scene. And then I'll try to end with something a little more upbeat, so you're not left with all of that. It begins for you with the second cessation. He stopped breathing twice. The second cessation. Inside that silence, quiet like cotton, quiet like fog, quiet like done. Then, as if someone struck a terrible blow in the room, a deafening without a sound for being deafened, rush and spin in that breathlessness, then not terrible. Only our loss is terrible, but the death is not terrible, simply unspeakable, something beyond anything we knew before this moment. Common, yes, but beyond whatever it means to comprehend, not to be comprehended. Death itself is quiet, its priestly work completed. We stand in its presence for a while, dumb and numb, our hearts still beating. Nurses enter the room on their quiet shoes. How do they know? Can they turn the monitors off in the room but keep them on at the station? Well, of course. They take pulse at feet, throat, wrist, thigh, and then the charge nurse, a woman in blue, her voice soft, calls into the dark hall to someone with a clipboard. 22:30. I automatically calculate. 10:30 at night. She pauses at the door, takes us in. She says softly, take all the time you want. Someone starts the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven. My mother adds the final phrase for the dead, and let perpetual light shine upon him. We touch him. We tell him we love him. We kiss his forehead. My mother bends over him and sobs into his chest. What is it that my mother stands up, hanging onto the bed railing, wobbly on her frail legs, turns to say something to all of us. She gathers her breath. His greatest wish was to have all of you return to the church. Does she look at me? I think she looks at me. Because my brothers have returned to the Catholic Church and brought with them their wives. And my youngest sister is in Africa right now with a mission group. And Mary Jo, while not practicing Catholicism, is more spiritual than all the rest of us. And Mother knows this. And so that leaves me. I stare, stunned. This is what she wants to say at a time like this, and to say it in such a way as manipulation rather than last wish, to say that one thing that would mean I had disappointed my father. Everything I have tried to be to her and failed to be comes rushing back in wild heat. Everything of the past, the hard core of our troubles, shimmers in the air with whatever is left of my father in that ceremony of dying. My thumb goes to my lips, chewing the nail, my breath hot with old anger rising again, inviting my thumb. The claw is prevented from doing harm by tearing it away, piercing instead my own lip. I don't say a word, bite down. And then, not on your life, not even for you, Dad. And then the skepticism. Did he really ask that? Would he have asked that? Or was that a long ago wish? Or did she make it up so I would be who she wanted to be, me to be again? The world shifts back to the room. We are half orphaned. Our family stands in a hospital room now that is a field of silence all about her. She remains now mother, parent, elder, and now widow. She is drive, control, shame, power, mourning, distorted love, 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 all of it. And also, suddenly, I know this more deeply than anything. She is alone. And now an intuition springs from connection that has always been knife sharp between us. Her solitude will be specific, demanding. And mothers should have that. These women who gave us life, who raised us up, who wiped our butts. But hers is beyond me for one simple reason. I have not been a good daughter. And I don't intend to start now. The pattern was set long ago and can't be marred by breath or unbreath. Except I know nothing of the work of grief. Except I know nothing really of her. I know nothing of myself. So that opens the book and sets the tone. She and I were often at loggerheads. If you met her, you would find her lovely. She was a wonderful woman, generous, warm-hearted, friendly, and astute. And we were on a collision course. We were just different kinds of people, and I could not meet her demands. So the journey that begins with this moment is a stumbling, meandering quest, the difficulty which I'm sure emotionally is somewhat similar to Basho's Trail. And we had difficult times, and there had to be moves, and she went into a home for the aged, and then she went to a medical care facility. And this is from a later chapter where she is already in the home and the dementia is advancing. And I am there to take her out to lunch. I have wheeled her down 6 blocks of uneven sidewalk in our hometown of Hart, Michigan. And it's called My Mother's Country. We find the cafe unexpectedly closed. She goes into martyr speak. Oh, it's all right, I'm fine. If I wheel her back, lunch at the facility will be over and she will be hungry and they will be bothered in the kitchen and give her PB&J and milk. I wipe the sweat off my face. I adjust her hat. I adjust mine. The only option, down the block, Christie's Poorhouse, a local dive that smells of spilled beer and fried food and could qualify for the Antarctic Research Station. The air conditioning is so high. I remember a side room where we might sit and no one would trip over this lug of a wheelchair. I see Mom's face taking on that distant look. She's slipping back into her broken mind, and I can't bear to let her go just yet. Quick now, I ease the wheelchair down the curb, rattle our way over cracked concrete, dodge a couple of cars up the other curb, and through the boot-scuffed aluminum storm door into the dark space. The patrons, coveralled out-of-work men and a couple of ciggy-scented women, seeing us struggle over the threshold, slide their heavy bodies off the stools and become more than kind, shoving tables and chairs as we negotiate our way to that side room. Even the regulars leaning out from the booth scoot out of the way. Can you make it, honey? Sure you okay, darlings? Once settled in the side room, the sweet waitress opens the side door to the street and the hot air rushes in, warming the space. And at my look, she shrugs, what the hell, in reference to the air conditioning. Mom can see the traffic, the comings and goings of the town, and this will occupy her. We are fun. I order soup for her, kitchen noodle, and when it comes, thick old-fashioned egg noodles crowd the broth. I break up the noodles so they won't slide off her spoon. I feed her often, but when we are out like this, she wants to feed herself as much as she can. Good, she tucks right in. After a while, she lifts her head, straight white hair glowing in the gray dark. She studies the room, and she asks, "Is this a bar?" I brace myself. It's not that she minds bars, but for all the memories she has lost, certain proprieties remain indelible as tattoos. We are here in the middle of a weekday, not Friday night fish fry for Catholics, which was the appropriate time she and Dad patronized our local bar. I don't know if she will object. This woman who once walked out of a restaurant for being owned by people whose political views were so far left she thought they might be communists. That, and they served pork chops with garlic instead of apples. Yes, Mom, it's a bar. I thought so. She nods like she's figured out something. She inhales a long noodle, broth spilling from the spoon. I brace myself and ask, "How do you feel about that?" "Oh, real good." She nods, slurps her soup. I smile. "Well then, Mom, would you like a beer?" "Oh no, I couldn't do that." She puts her spoon down like that's final. I decide right then I'll have a beer. "You want some of mine?" "Are you gonna?" I know what this means. I'm gonna have something Belgian. This appeals to her national pride, her Belgian ancestry. Well, a little sip. She raises her eyebrows. How daring. I order a pint of Blue Moon and a highball glass on the side, and when it comes, I pour off a third, tuck in a straw, and hold it to her lips. She wraps her mouth around it and sucks, and it's gone. I pour in the rest, and over the course of the lunch, she drinks it all. My mother has not had a drink in years, not by choice, but because alcohol exacerbates her incontinence. But now she wears these heavy-duty pull-ups every day. It's a moot point, isn't it? I don't care. I'm thrilled she's enjoying a beer. It's the smallest of adventures, the simplest of forays into a normalcy she has lost, a momentary reprieve. I know that AIDS will have to deal with the results, and I should be ashamed of myself, but to see her draw on that beer with such intensity makes my eyes smart. Before we know it, lunch is over. To go out means to come back, to return to that other country. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Okay, great. You both have your microphones. The floor is yours now. Does anybody have any questions? Anything to bring up?
I have a question for John, because I'm so fascinated. He talked about the haibun, which is this prose form that's followed by something like a haiku. And I just wondered how you stumbled on that for the so much of the manuscript.
I've been interested in classical Asian poetry since grade school, and had a professor who translated it. And when it gets imported into Western culture through the Imagists at the start of the 20th century, then you quickly see it spread a lot of its aesthetic choices into people like Hemingway, who popularizes it. So I've always understood that it had power, and I just kind of wanted to see where that came from.
Nice, thank you. I was very curious. It's an unusual form.
Can I ask, Is your mom still with us then?
No, she died in November 16th of 2020, and likely of COVID, but we will not know for sure because we were unable to be with her, and they were testing her on Tuesday and she passed away on a Monday. So we don't know the answer to that question, but I think she died of a kind of cultural COVID because she'd been alone so much. So it's not an unusual story, but it is a very hard story.
It's hard.
Yeah. Yes, so thank you for asking. Appreciate that. Yeah. Questions from you folks? Yeah.
I just have a comment, and one is that your description of your father's death
Mhm.
was remarkable.
Oh, thank you.
And second, when you were talking about what your mother said right after your father died, and what you took from it, just reminds me of how mother-daughter relationships are like an onion. You know, your mother can say something which everybody would say, "Oh, that's lovely," but you have all these layers, and so for you, what is heard is not what is said to you.
Mhm.
You're way deep in the onion, and then
Yeah.
and you did that.
Yeah, the memories are layered, and the experiences, of course, for all of us, for everyone who has a parent, they're layered, and we read them at different levels, I think. And of course, it was a shocking moment to me.
No, it was really
And
smart.
yet there's something remarkably funny about it, which is often the case with these tragic incidents, that they're laced with this kind of weirdly cosmic humor that you just don't know what to do with. So thank you for seeing that. We really appreciate that. Yeah. It's like opening with the AK-47. Is that a great lead? I mean, honestly, wow. Thank you. You had a question?
Do you have a daughter, and how's your relationship with her?
I don't have a daughter. I have a stepson, and it was challenging, but it's been a lovely relationship. This is my husband, David Early, and his son became my stepson, and we've done really well, I think. Thank you for asking.
I'm kind of curious about the difference between mother and daughter and mother and son relationship. Is there anything more to be said, ma'am? Would you like to? add
Oh,
to
no, I just sort of had, my relationship with my mother was fraught, but then after my dad died, then I was the go-to person. And so there was this journey to fix it.
Yeah, I think that's what we're left with when one parent, and I mean, and I don't think this is uncommon, when one elder dies, the other, it's sort of stripped away what has been masked, what's been covered in the relationship, and certainly we became aware of her frailties to a much greater degree. And then it's that moment of step up to the plate, honey, and I did not want to do it. I was not there. But you don't have options, and then the layering happens. Yeah, there you go. Yes.
What did your siblings think of the book? And did they have the same impressions of your mom?
All of the daughters have, to varying degrees, a difficult relationship with my mother. She had a very close relationship with her sons, and they enjoyed a sense of privilege. And when I finished this book, which I have done with all of the books about my family, I gave manuscripts to the entire family so that they could go through, and if there was a inaccuracy or something that was severely too much, that I'd crossed some kind of boundary, they had the right to say to me. And so they all read it. And what my brother Tom said to me at one point, he said, I never realized how differently Mom treated you from the way she treated us. And I thought, it took you this long to see that? but it was a blessed realization on his part. Yeah. Yeah. So
That's wonderful that you're able to unmask that and illuminate him.
thank you.
Yeah.
It's an interesting process, family dynamics. Yeah.
What type of relationship did your mom have with her mother?
They were very close, and this is part of the guilt that the daughters carried. In my mother's, when she was raising us, there were 5 of us, she also had at various times in our house my grandmother, her mother, my father's father, and an invalid aunt. All lived with us at various times in this farmhouse, which was not huge. But so she had sort of paid ahead 3 times with all of that. And I think she really, really hoped that she could live with one of us. But I don't know how it is with other families, but all of our families were dependent on the 2-income household. Nobody could stay home to make sure that she was all right. And there wasn't a lot of space, you know, those old Catholic families, lots of kids. And so it was just not possible. And that was part of the guilt pattern that we had to grapple with. And, you know, healthcare, elder care in this country right now, and that's the underpinnings of the book, is just not in great shape. You know, we're just, you know, at a real crisis point. So.
I have a question for you. So what is the period of your life that your book covers? I mean, you talk about AK-47 and having been in service and going to Japan, but what is that period of your life?
I think of it as sort of the long period of conflict that we are still currently in, and it's mostly about the Obama and Trump administration era, with a flashback to going back to Vietnam with my friend Frenchie. I was born there, and he served 2 tours of the war there. And there's one other sort of aside about serving in Panama and talking about its landscape and searching for someone who had disappeared at that time. So, but mostly, you know, the years up to 2000, 8 years or so.
John, I remember reading in the Common Reader there, when you had the Japanese trip segmented several articles. You know, I was affected by your description of the trail, of the actual travel, following this path. Out some places it was so very lonely, it seemed like. And then you would go to the local hostelry or whatever and interact with the people there. I thought that description of that was interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was sort of the perfect mix because I was a bit like a ghost among the Japanese. I don't speak Japanese, and my technology mostly failed me in translation apps and so on. But mostly I just wasn't around other people. I was a self-guided tour, and I walked in the mountains for several days and would really not see anybody all day. You know, there were lots of bears up there, and you know, it's just a lovely landscape. And at night, each night, I would often be put up at a ryokan, which is a kind of you know, hotel of sorts, and they have wonderful food, and they're often built on an onsen, which is a hot spring. And so, you know, after walking and sometimes being ecstatic, but sometimes being very miserable, I get to tuck into a meal and go down to the hot tub. So it was a great trip. Yeah.
John, what sort of universal truths of humanity were revealed to you in the years that spent? And then how did you, in what ways did you yourself come out of those years of travel to such diverse places a different person?
Right.
No pressure.
Universal truth is my editor, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, you know, $28.95, and you'll be able to, you know, all the secrets of humanity. For me, yeah, and I find that when I'm writing about a subject, that often the thematic parts of it come in slowly. So I'll think that I'm writing about riding in a biplane or doing something, you know. And then it turns out I was really after this idea of personal freedom all along, for instance. And so some things happened where, my family was kind of trapped in some situations at the start of the period that the book begins. And we slowly worked our way out of bad employment and other issues. And part of my question still remains is once you're free of the stresses, debts are reduced and, that kind of stuff, what do you do with your life? Like, do you sit down and have a look at your phone or, read a book? Do you decide to go somewhere? Do you take care of someone else? And the answers to all of that for me personally are in the book. And I sum them up by what I call the act of trying. It's a kind of getting out of yourself and trying to, engage with and help others, I think. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi there. I understand you're both published by the same publishing house, and I wonder what drew you each to them and maybe what drew them to you as authors, if you know. If you could share anything about that with us.
Well, it's a little, it's a little embarrassing, but very nice, is that I applied or submitted to the AWP Nonfiction Award, and the manuscript won that award, and University of Georgia Press contracts with AWP to publish that winner.
Oh,
So that's that. My go-to press has been Wayne State University Press, and they've published, I think, 5 of the books. And so I would have sent it to them. Actually, I did send it to them, and it was 2 weeks later, and they hadn't even gotten to it yet. So it was easy. It was an easier call than it might have been to make and say, "I'm sorry, I'm taken," but it's really happy news.
Yeah.
So, but I think John's a much more prestigious track to that.
Well, simply different. I published my first collection of essays with Georgia, whatever year that was, I don't know, 2014 maybe. After that, the director of the press, Lisa Bayer, approached me and asked if I would help found a creative nonfiction series at Georgia. There aren't that many, even university presses, that are devoted to those kinds of things. Nebraska has had one and so on. So Georgia wanted one, and I began that and spent a few years doing that, and have since stepped back from that. It's been taken over by Nicole Walker, who's a terrific writer. But the series is called Crux, and if you have a manuscript or someone who does, please send it in.
Thank you.
I have a question for Anne-Marie. In retrospect, you had to do it over again, if you had done anything differently?
1,000 things. No, I think in memory, I would have tried sooner to develop a relationship with my mother. Tried to come back to her sooner. In terms of the caretaking, the 10 years that she remained alive after my father's passing, I would so have, I don't know what I would have done to find a different way to manage her care. I would so have, if we could have kept her in her home somehow. She fired 3 people, so we did make an attempt, but there are not a lot of good channels, and I have to say in the end, she did qualify for Medicaid, but the process of attaining that and going through that and all the spending down, and it is dehumanizing. It is, it's hard on the families. It's a really, really difficult process to manage. And if we hadn't had the resources to get good counsel and those kinds of things, which many people don't, I'm sure we would have given up and there would have been more tragedy, So in terms of regrets, I just wish we could have figured out a way to take care of her in her home or in one of ours. And it was not going to work. Our world is very different. Yeah. So thank you for asking. Yeah. Yes.
Did you have a relationship with your mother's mom?
Not close, but she was in our house and we were used to having elders. So we knew what that was like. And it wasn't a burden in any way. It was just part of the family, you know.
Did you learn anything about your mother by watching her interaction with her mom?
I learned that she was an incredibly good caretaker for all of the trouble that she and I had. She was an incredible caretaker. She was very attentive and lovely with her mom, and they were close. Go figure. You know? It's not, it doesn't follow a pattern. I think everybody's story is different. Yeah. Yeah. So, thank you. Oh, I don't know. Yes,
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah, listening to you read, I was surveying my own mind of books that I've read about old age. And I've read lots of books about dysfunctional families. But do you have favorite books about old age? And if you don't, or if there aren't any well-known books about old age, why do you think people are not more interested in old age? Or should
I wish they were. I mean, I think we're all gonna, if we're lucky, we get there, you know? So why aren't we thinking about it more? That's a really good question. And I think in other cultures, I think there's a lot of reverence for the elders in some of the places where you might have been. Or is that a stereotype?
I think that's correct.
Yeah, it seems to me that other cultures have that.
My friend Frenchie mentioned during the reading part, he has a daughter. He claims that sons give you your life back and that daughters stick around to take care of you. So there's his gendered idea, but I don't know if that matches with your experience.
It's more often daughters, not always. When I was in both the manor, which is the place, the home for the aged where she was, and in the full-scale medical care facility, it was many more times the daughter who was present and keeping the interaction going and visiting, not exclusively, but often. So just to go back to your question, I think we're a little afraid of age. I think we don't really like age. We don't think in this culture that it's very beautiful. And we find it difficult to think of decline as interesting or in any way even, how do I say this, entertaining. You know, there were days when my mother was so funny, and she's one day we're together and we're actually sitting really close, and she's studying my face and I know she is about to say something. I mean, you can just feel that coming. And she looks right at me and she says, "You have a lot of wrinkles." And coming, you know, she's 95, I'm 60 plus at the time, and she's just, I'm thinking, okay, how is this not humor? It's not funny. And I think we have to take a rethink on the whole process of aging and embracing some aspect of how we become old. I'm not saying it very specifically, but that's how I feel about it. Yeah. I don't know.
I'm curious about the second part of this question. Are there any other books about aging that you read?
Bittersweet Season is a really good book because it also touches on and has some resources for all of those elder care systems that are sometimes working and sometimes not working. That's the one that came to mind first. I'm just trying to think. I've just recently read a couple of others. And I'm sorry, they're just slipping my mind right now. But they're out there, but not a lot. Not a lot of them. No. So, yeah.
Any final questions?
Can I just indulge in 1 minute of promotion?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
My name is Ben, and I am managing editor of Common Reader, which houses the writings of John Griswold and also Jeanette Cooperman, formerly of St. Louis Magazine, a very well-known and respected local journalist. If you would like to receive the Common Reader in your email every 2 weeks, I would be happy to take your first and last name and also your email. It's not shared with anyone else. So if you're at all interested in that after this reading, feel free to come see me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. I should. I'm glad you were here.
And I just want to do a quick shout out to University of Georgia Press, which has been really a beautiful press to work with. And if you can purchase their books, that's lovely. Thank you. And thanks again to all of you for coming. It means a lot to